Hi, fifth grade. Welcome to math. I'm Mrs. Pierson, and I'm going to be teaching you today's learning target is I can find the volume of a rectangular prism. So in fifth grade, the only volume we have to find is of the shape of a rectangular prism. There are other shapes that you can find volume for, but for fifth grade, you only have to do rectangular prism. Okay, so we need to talk about our success criteria, and let's take a look. We've got, I can find the volume of a rectangular prism. So what do we need to know in order to be successful with that learning target? So our success criteria, well, the first success criteria is I can multiply three numbers. And as you know, we've been working on this, multiplying two numbers within a parenthesis, and then the third number after that. We've been practicing multiplying expressions that have three numbers. So we do need to be able to multiply three numbers. And then the other success criteria is going to be mainly vocabulary. Rectangular prism, we're going to talk in a moment about what a rectangular prism is. 3D, talking about three dimensions, that's what that D stands for. Three dimensions of a rectangular prism is the length, the width, and the height. And I'm going to demonstrate this for you again in a moment. Here is a picture of a rectangular prism. And the definition of a rectangular prism, a prism is a 3D figure that has a base and a lid that match each other, okay, both rectangles, and four other sides that are rectangles. So we have a total of 6 sides that are rectangular faces put together to be a rectangular prism. And that is the shape that we'll be looking at. The only other shape that is in this category that gets its own name is a cube. And the reason a cube is considered a rectangular prism is it has 6 sides that are all squares, and a square is a type of rectangle. So a cube is a type of rectangular prism. So you will be seeing cubes as well. The 3 dimensions that I mentioned, length is, the length, how long the rectangular prism is. The width, how wide the rectangular prism is. And height is always vertical, always. So the vertical is the height, how tall it is. So that is what 3 dimensions would be looking like. And the last word you're going to hear us talk about today is capacity. Capacity is the amount that you can fit inside of a 3D shape. In rooms, what is the capacity of people that you can fit inside, or inside of a box, the complete capacity. So we're going to be talking about that. So first I want to show you some real life rectangular prisms just so we can get a sense of what we're measuring for when we're looking at volume. So here's one somewhat rectangular prism. So you can see we have a rectangular face, rectangle, 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 we have 4, and then we have a lid and we have a base that are all rectangles. So we would just call this a box, but the definition, geometrical definition, would be a rectangular prism. So when we're measuring for volume, we're measuring what the capacity or how much we can fit inside of the rectangular prism. And what we're measuring, units, are cubes. So 3D cubes is what we use to measure what the volume of a rectangular prism is. So if I were to be measuring this, obviously I would take out Sophie's things first, but we would be measuring how many of these cubes can we fit inside of this rectangular prism if we're stacking them next to each other, tight, 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 with no spaces. So we would stack a layer along the bottom, another layer, until we filled to capacity all the way to the top. And however many cubes we were able to fit inside, that represents the volume of that rectangular prism, okay? So this would be one. Another example, again, just a box, rectangular prism. This one's a little bit longer. Try to pull back there. So you can see we have rectangular face matching. We have 2 rectangular faces matching, and then we have the sides as well. So we have 6 rectangular faces, meaning a rectangular prism. The capacity or the volume is what we can fit inside of it. So again, I would use cubes, okay? And I would take my cubes and I would fill my cubes up all the way, the whole thing. And the number of cubes I can fit inside equals the volume of that rectangular prism. I have one more box that I grabbed, or a rectangular prism that I grabbed, but it might be too big. Not sure. It's a big one. So as we know, they come in all different shapes and sizes. So all the way around we have rectangles, we have a rectangular base, and we have rectangular lid. So this would be 6 sides of rectangular faces, rectangular prism. And the volume is how many cubes can I fit inside of the rectangular prism. So on the inside, and it's full of a bunch of stuff. So the only difference, we're always using cubes. Our units are always in cubes, but the size of the cube depends on the size of the rectangular prism. If I were to wonder how many how many cubes I can fit in this room that I'm in, I would never use this small of cubes. Can you imagine? I start in the corner and I'm just going across. It would be ridiculous. For that size, I would probably want to be finding cubes that were maybe the size of a yard or a meter high and have that large of cubes, right? So it just depends. This particular cube is pretty small, so it would be for a smaller rectangular prism. So that would be the difference when you see the units. So the units will always be cubed or cubic units, meaning how many cubes it took for the volume, okay? So that's looking at our vocabulary. Again, rectangular prism. Hopefully we're familiar now with what a rectangular prism is. It's a box is another word for it. It's a 3D figure that has length, width, and height. Length is how long, width is how wide, height is how tall it is vertically. The capacity is how much will fit inside. So we're measuring the inside of rectangular prisms today. All right, so let's get to our next item, and that will be the formula that we're going to be using. So I'm going to ask you, if you don't have your math notebook, to grab it. And I'm going to ask you to copy down the formula, the steps, the process that we're going to be using for today's volume, okay? So go ahead and hit pause and copy down the learning target along with all of the information on this paper. You're going to copy all of it, so go ahead and hit pause. Okay, thank you for copying that down and being a good listener. So again, I can find the volume of a rectangular prism. The formula that we're going to be using is multiplication. Length, the length of the rectangular prism, times the width of it, times the height. We just multiply the 3 numbers. There is a second formula that you're going to be learning tomorrow with Miss Mountain. For today, we're going to just be using this one formula, but just know there are 2 formulas for finding volume. They're very similar, and Miss Mountain will get into the second formula tomorrow. But for today, length times width times height. We also, instead of using the X, you'll see me use a dot here that means multiplication. And after you find what those 3 numbers, the product of those 3 numbers being multiplied, then you always label your answer with cubic units. And you can write it 2 ways. You can write cubic, whatever the units are, cubic feet, cubic inches, or you can write it using a small 3, meaning you'd write the word inches cubed or feet cubed. Always be sure to cube the word feet, not the number that you solved, and I'll show you what that means. All right, now that we have our formula, let's do a little bit of practice. Remember, I can find the volume of a rectangular prism. And here we have our formula again. The dot just means multiplication. I prefer to use the dot over the X because most of the time in algebra, X represents something else that we'll talk about later. So length times width times height. So you find those 3 dimensions and you multiply those 3. It's literally, that's what we're going to be doing. So let's take a peek at our first rectangular prism. So here we have a tall rectangular prism. I know that the length is 5, the width is 2, and the height is 10. Okay, so I'm going to take the first 2 numbers, the length times the width, and then I'm going to multiply it by the height. Okay, so we know 5 times 2 is 10. 10 times 10 is 100. So we could fit 100 cubic inches inside of this rectangular prism. So if I had little inch-sized cubes, I could fit 100 stacking all the way to the top. Remember, you also, if you prefer, you can put inches cubed, but always make sure you put the cube on the unit, not on the number. You would increase that number and that would not be accurate. Okay, let's try another one. Remembering length times width times height. So I'm looking for my length. Here's my length, 20 times width. The width is 4 and my height is 5. Okay, so 20 times 4 would be 80, and 80 times 5 would equal 400. And then I don't want to forget what my units were. My units are meters, so I can write out cubic meters, or I could put meters cubed with the 3 on the end. Okay, sorry if you can't see that. So that's when you're given a picture of the rectangular prism with the dimensions labeled. That's one way it might be served to you. Another situation that you might come upon is where they didn't label it for you, but they drew the actual cubes. You're going to see this a lot in our Bridges workbook. So when you're given this, you have to find those 3 dimensions yourself, and it's just a matter of counting the cubes. So here's our length, okay? So let's find how many cubic units are across there. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the length of this is 6. I'm going to label that so that I don't forget. Now we're going to look at width. I can see 1, 2. I have 2 cubes going back. And now height, our vertical, 1, 2. I have 2 high. So it's a 6 by 2 by 2. So I've found my 3 dimensions. Now, to find volume, I need to multiply. How many total cubes are there? 6 times 2 is 12, and 12 times 2 is 24. Now, I haven't been given any units. These are just cubes, so I'm going to use the word cubic units because I don't have feet, inches, or anything like that. Or like I said, you could put units cubed. Okay, so that's another skill that comes along with this, is finding the 3 dimensions. And we will practice more of that in group. All right, now I've given us a cube, and we know it's a cube because the length, the width, and the height are all the same measurement. So we know those are squares. It's still going to be the same formula because it's a type of rectangular prism, as we talked about. So we have our length is 4 times our width times our height. So we're multiplying all 3 numbers. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4. Now remember, this is why we've been practicing the algorithm. So we can do 16 times 4, carry the 2, and I end up with 64. I was given the units this time, it's feet. So you may write cubic feet, or if you prefer, you may put feet and put that cube on the feet. Remembering, we never cube our number, we only cube the units because we're saying that our cubes that we used for this are little feet. So they would be cubes this size, okay? So different size cubes, looking for volume, inside for capacity. So that's just a little bit of practice. We're just kind of getting our feet wet with volume today. Like I said, Miss Mountain will have a second formula for you tomorrow. We're going to be practicing in group today. And before we get to that, I just want to remind you, when you come to group today, bring your Bridges workbook. We're going to be practicing some problems inside of your Bridges workbook. So do the practice volume problems that I put on the slide. Bring those in your notebook. We'll correct those. And then we'll do some more problems inside of the notebook. So you have 2 things you need to bring to math group today. Your math notebook with your practice problems inside from the slide and your workbook, okay? All right, we have an exit slip before you go, as always. See how you're doing. So here's your exit slip. Please find the volume of this rectangular prism, and don't forget to put the correct units. So go ahead and hit pause and find the volume of that. Okay, let's see how you did. So if I take a look at the dimensions, it was a 6 by 2 by 4. 6 times 2 is 12, and then 12 times 4 is 48. And I wrote both ways that you can choose to write the units. You can write out the words 48 cubic feet, or remember, you can cube the feet, not cubing the 48. So hopefully you got that. If not, we're going to be practicing in groups, so no need to worry. All right, we'll see you soon. Thanks for joining.